How do we kind of keep this going? And we are recording. How do we keep this going and make sure that everyone's happy, but we also want to protect the time of the buyer as well, because they're going to be paying for inspections and CL 100s, and now 4 days later they decide to back out, right? But speaking of finesse, I think that that's kind of the point of this conversation, right? Is how do we really know what our value proposition is, and how are we going to start talking to these buyers? Because come August 17th, we are going to really have to dive in to understand, what does buyer's agency look like? What does the buyer's agency conversation look like? And I think that everybody that is on this call right now is somebody that is all in and ready to have that conversation of, like, let's dive in and open it up. What does talking about buyer's agency look like? What does protecting your value as a buyer's agent look like? And that's kind of what we're going to do today. So does anybody want to jump in before we've got a few slides and we've thrown it together to start the conversation and role play, but does anybody have any like questions, concerns, or comments? No. Okay. That's how scared we all are.
So I'll add, I wasn't here at the beginning of the conversation, but what comes to my mind is recently 2 different transactions. The buyers are like, hey, we're ready to make an offer. You know, they see the property, they're excited. And on the selling side, it's like, great, can we see a proof of funds with a licensed financial professional that will put the license on the line to say you do have the funds in place? And 2 out of 2 times, no, that could never be furnished. So what I'm hearing on a national level is there are a lot of buyers from other markets coming to markets like ours, lying, saying they have cash. You know, one person has a screenshot of $2.2 million in their bank account, but can't get a licensed financial professional to back it, saying that, yes, this money's there. Like, that's not someone we want to go under contract with. So that's what I've been doing to vet buyers, to make sure people are actually qualified before we go under contract and have to go back on the market because the buyer doesn't actually have the funding in place.
Are you doing that prior to even showing them houses to get the proof of funds?
No, my sellers, I leave that up to them. They certainly can say, no, we need to see proof of funds before the showing. So that's up to the seller. I would advise them, sure, you know, if you're 83 years old and it's very hard for you to leave your house for the day, why would you let someone in who can't afford your house? So I'd leave that up to the seller, but that would be my advice to them. And, you know, it's just, it can be a month of negotiating with someone who doesn't even have the funds in place. Why are we wasting our time?
Well, I think using that as a kind of a roll into to the buyer's agency conversation, because I think a lot of this is about having these relevant conversations up front. So I know a lot of us are in different markets, but a lot of these conversations on buyer's agency really were kind of held until the buyer decided to write the offer. I know for us as a team, we bring it up, we talk about agency because it's legal, we have to, right? We disclose it, and then we go and show them houses all weekend, and then they decide they want to write an offer, and we say, okay, well, this is buyer's agency. We explain it. We explain dual agency, we explain designated agency in the state of South Carolina. And so I think that, like, if Anna, you kind of want to like roll into this, that's about having these qualifying conversations up front. And we actually have some things that we think are going to be positive by coming out of this. While Anna goes to the next slide, I had a real world experience where I had a client call and she said, I want to go see this house. It was a Sunday afternoon. It was one of our listings. And I said, okay, Mrs. Buyer, I'd love to show you this house. I'll, you know, make sure that I can get us in and call the seller and double check that we're good for 4 p.m. Let me ask you, have you just started your home search? Oh yeah, I'm looking at other houses. Great. Have you been pre-qualified? What lender are you working with? So you could tell she started getting agitated because I was asking questions. But it was 2 o'clock on a Sunday and I'm having to get the seller to let us in at 4 o'clock on a Sunday. So fast forward, I start explaining to her, I said, I hear that you said, you're looking at other houses. Are you working with multiple agents? No, I'm just calling the listing agents. I want to get into these houses. We ended up having a really hard conversation about agency. It was uncomfortable, to be honest with you. But what I was doing was protecting my time, right? And also practicing for August 17th, because when I show up at that house, she's going to have to sign something for me to show her that property, right? So it was an uncomfortable conversation, but I said, let's try it. Afterwards, she called me back and said, I want to let you know that I've spoken to over 7 agents today. You're the first and only agent that helped educate me on the process, educate me on agency. I really had no clue what I was doing. It wasn't trying to do anything wrong. I just thought that that's what you do. She's like, and so I did go look at other houses, but I want to let you know that I did register at a new build community, and I put your name down, and I felt that you gave me more value in 5 minutes on the phone than any of the other agents gave me. And the answer to that was that we had a conversation that felt really weird and sticky up front, but it actually made a lot more sense to her in the back end because she felt educated and more prepared. So Anna, let's kind of roll into it.
Sorry, I had to unmute. Yeah, so we've been starting out with some of these conversations in appointments recently. And I think the big takeaway is I've been going back to a lot of the headlines and using the headlines in these meetings. So I was on an appointment yesterday with a girl, and she was talking about what's your average commission, right? That phrase, how many have you have heard that? What's your average commission, right? What's your standard commission? And so I actually think it's been kind of cool to have the headline to support that. I actually think my conversation about commission has gotten stronger since the settlement, because I have almost like a third party to go ping off of when I have this conversation. And so I've been using the headline, and this is one that we pulled. It could soon cost homeowners a lot less to sell their home. Or the 6% commission is busted, right? That was a really big headline there for a couple days after the settlement. So I've been going into these conversations with, oh, have you seen the headline saying that the 6% commission's busted, right? I just will lead off with that question in appointments. And it's been opening up for a lot of really great conversations about really how commissions are paid, what agency looks like. And so this was one of those headlines that we kind of put together as a myth, ultimately being able to use it to explain to our consumers, hey, let's talk about the breakdown of commission. In North Carolina, we're very blessed in North Carolina. North Carolina has been one of the few states that all along has done a really good job of showing how the buyer agency is separated out from the total commission, showing the buyers, what they are expected, a buyer agency or buyer agents are expected to be compensated on that BAA. So I think, we in North Carolina were in a great spot going into August 17th because we've already, I think, are kind of advanced in the practices. But this headline's one that we've really been working to combat. And so the answer here, right, as most of you know, is that commission's never been set, right? There's never been a set commission that was having to be paid. There's never been, sorry, I've got to let some people in. There's never been a fixed commission on our part. It's always been negotiable. And being able to use these headlines to play against has been a really strong move, I think, in appointments. And it's so weird. I feel like it's actually softened the conversation about commission, because I feel like for the first time, the consumer is actually interested in how it all works. So if you're not having the commission conversation with the settlement in mind, I would challenge you to start working on that now, because it's made a huge difference. And ironically enough, I actually feel like we've been receiving without as much conflict higher commission amounts since we started working this into our scripts. Has anyone else found that they've been using this in their conversations with sellers, especially at the table when you're looking at commission amounts? Has anyone else found a little bit of relief in it kind of being out there in front of people to talk about? I'd just be curious to hear.
Yes, I have. And I had the same experience as Allison. It's kind of like buyers are so thankful that you're ahead of the game and you're the only one that's informed them. And then sellers are thankful for the disclosure, and it's very clear. What we do is print off what the market is doing and tell the seller that they can choose what they pay a buyer agent. And mostly they answer, why wouldn't I want to pay as much as possible to bring a buyer to this house. So I've found it all to be very positive and more professional, and it gives clients more confidence moving forward. I think they're relieved that it's so clear.
Yeah, we had a great conversation with an agent on my team last night, and again, it pulls into this headline very well, right? They were looking at an option to go with a 2.9% total. I would call a discount broker, right? If you go to their website, looks like they do a lot of the similar things that we do, right? They're not going to throw the owner's information in the MLS and require the owner to handle the whole process, but it looks very similar on paper, but we know the services rendered at 0.5% and rendered at, upwards of 2.5% are just by default going to look different, right? I mean, they will, right? Our time is valuable, particularly with a high, performer. My hours are so valuable that, when you start looking at that number, it's just not feasible, right? To provide that same amount of service. And I think that's one of the conversations that we've had in the past is, well, how your fiduciary duty, right, is to provide the full service to that client. But one of the things that we were able to flip the script on yesterday is say, okay, well, look, you're looking at paying 2.9% total. You're willing to pay 2.4% to a buyer to have an agent that's going to represent them with the highest level of care, and you're only willing to invest in yourself 0.5% for representation. And it was really funny because I feel like combating the discount broker also got very easy in this conversation, because now we're really able to single out and say, well, look, 2.4% of that is headed over to the buyer broker, right, in their model. And now you're leaving 0.5%, right, for representation to you. Do you see how lopsided that is? Why are you so willing to pay that buyer's agent that you don't even know, right, such a high amount, and be willing to settle for the agent that would take 0.5%, right, to represent you? And so being able to separate down and have an open conversation, I feel like, is really powerful. So it's been interesting to see how we put the script on that.
And Anna, I think so, like, clarity is power is what keeps coming into my mind, right? Like Megan even said, look, like, clients are very, very happy to have this clarity. They feel a lot more settled and a lot more confident in you as the agent when you can explain to them the process. And what you just did was said, look, all you're focusing on is the 2.9%, but you're paying out the 2.4 to the buy side. Who's representing you? Like, they're focusing on the number. But when you really start breaking down representation, and I feel like Brett Davis did a presentation on this, and we could go back and look at that and find her stuff and share it with everybody. But do you have a sheet of your value proposition? Do you have something that you can sit here and elevator pitch or on a one-pager explain what is my value proposition for buyers and what is my value proposition for sellers? Because if I sat there and said, okay, 2.9%, great. Well, then my fee, right, is 2.5, and that means we're going to be paying out 0.4% to the buy side. No. I want somebody to bring me a buyer. Well, they are. Somebody's going to bring you a buyer, and that's 0.4% to that agent. Well, nobody's going to bring me a buyer for 0.4%. And you want me to represent you for 0.4%, right? You're discounting your own representation, and you're paying for somebody else to be represented at the highest level. And so it really is about breaking it down and helping them understand. But guys, I don't know about you guys, but that's an uncomfortable conversation sitting in somebody's living room, right? I mean, it is for me. I don't love that. I don't want to sit here and say, guys, look, like, you want to pay somebody else more money than me, and I'm going to be the one doing all the marketing and the open houses and doing everything, but you want to pay me less money. That's a weird conversation for me. But the more that we have it and the more that we talk about it, which is really why I would encourage you guys to unmute, cameras on, like, really engage, because the more that we practice now, we're not practicing on our clients. We won't be fumbling around sitting in these living rooms saying, oh gosh, I don't know. Sure, I'll take the 0.4%. Like, no, your value is your value. And if you're prepared with your value proposition that you can just hand it over and explain it, it becomes a lot easier.
So I'll add to that you hit the nail on the head, Allison. Most agents can't communicate their value without making it a run-on sentence. So I've had to slow down. I think I have a 7-page document now with all the services from start to finish that a buyer agent performs, and then a separate 7-page document, in an attractive pamphlet form with all the services a selling agent performs. And like, look this over. This is what you receive, parts of it, most of it, when you hire an agent. And that helps, just bring clarity. Like you say, clarity is power. Because it's very hard for us to communicate exactly what we do. We do so much. So if we can put that structure in there and just organize it here, this is what we do as agents. And it's like, wow, you guys do a lot. But to communicate that in 1 sentence or 2 sentences, it's just almost impossible. And then we sound confused and unsure, and that makes them feel confused and unsure, and they're not going to pay for something they're not clear about.
Yeah, communication, the value is what you're paid on, right? I mean, I know agents that, I will be honest with you, are far better than I am at keeping their paperwork together, at knowing their systems and processes. There are agents in my marketplace, I'm sure, that could kick my butt when it came to transaction to transaction. But I get more business because I am able to communicate my value much better. I'm able to communicate the experience that I have, the connections that we have into the community. And we've just over time refined that. One thing I will say, if you're on this call and you don't have that comprehensive list, and most of us go, especially we talk to sellers a lot, but like, think about going to that listing packet or that buyer packet. That tends to be the hot trigger word for these items. You guys are oftentimes looking for really obscure things to put on that sheet of paper to make yourself stand out. And what I'm here to say is, go back to the very, very basics. Go sit down and map out the entire process. One of the line items on our buyer packet and our seller packet is our paperwork bundle, right? And we give everything a little name. That's an EOS trick. Every single thing that we do has a title that sounds a little unique to us. And through that, we can sit down with the seller and say, look, I'm not going to feature dump you today. I'm not going to spend time going through all of the things that any agent that walks through the door is going to show up and provide for you. But what I want to do today is I want to highlight the 6 things that I think that is going to be most important to your home selling. And that way you're not sitting in that appointment going through, we do your paperwork. No one wants to hear you say that, and they don't want to take 60 seconds for you to explain it. But it is really funny how there's so much going on in the background that consumers have no clue that we do. So having that comprehensive list, like you said, Megan, is just so crucial. Let's pivot real quick and talk about this kind of conversation, right? The settlement for the first time will not allow sellers to pay compensation for an agent bringing the buyer. I'm here to tell you there are people out there that believe that this settlement resulted in the fact that sellers can no longer pay buyer's agents. I have been on an appointment where someone said, well, I can't pay a buyer's agent anymore, correct? So let's just talk about this a little bit. Obviously, we know this not to be true. And I'll go so far as, if you're going to have to be kind of countering this conversation, I think it's important to shift to some of our loan programs out there that did have some restrictions that were going to keep consumers even from paying buyer broker commission. Who knows what happens, what happened in the VA world in the last 2 weeks. Allison, you want to answer the question?
No, Anna, tell us. Well, I actually saw some information dumped, and I was watching Instagram, and I got a lot of incorrect information, to be very honest with you, that basically the buyer can wrap their buyer's compensation into their VA loan, which I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I'm gonna repost this. And then I saw it was wrong. That was wrong information. So, Anna, if you know that information, I'd love for you to throw it out there. Otherwise, I
Lender here.
Oh, hey girl, why don't you talk about it, girl?
The VA they're coming out and they're basically saying that the buyer will now be allowed to pay their own commission, pay the commission for their agent, which is a big step, because before they were never allowed to pay any piece of that. It does not say that they can roll it into the loan. So they will still have to pay that in cash, or even a piece of it theoretically with, like, if they got like a $10,000 seller credit, they could go towards a piece of that, but they would be responsible for the rest of the closing costs and the rest of the commission. So it doesn't say that they can roll it into a loan. That was never part of the thing.
No,
Melanie,
I was giving you the negative information that I thought was so exciting, and I
Oh,
almost
I know.
reposted it. And my whole point was, don't listen to people on Instagram that aren't qualified.
Don't
And
do
Melanie,
that. Yes, ma'am.
Melanie, this hasn't yet been implemented, right? This is just an announcement at this point.
That's my understanding. Yes.
I think it was in a special bulletin and we're waiting for it to move into a more normed process. But Melanie, let me ask you this too.
Sure.
With the FHA, with VA, what we're also looking at is that commission concessions would be held separate from the maximums that people could take. Because here's what we're going to run into, right? This issue of, okay, well, the seller's going to give a concession, right, to the buyer of $25,000, aka maybe the buyer commission on a home. And that, you know, there's obviously only X amount that buyers are able to take in concessions. And we've been looking for that carve out that would exempt, if it's being applied to commissions, being counted against the amount of concessions in total that they can take, correct?
They've really not changed any of the rules yet. So until they start changing the rules, those kind of things are up in the air. So like, for example, on VA, you can get the most concessions out of any loan on VA. You can have the seller pay your debt. You can have the seller pay up to 2% in points. You can have the seller pay up to 4% in closing costs, and all of those things are separate. And so I do think that if this comes to fruition and sellers really start refusing to pay buyers commissions, I think you're going to see some changes in rules. I think they're going to wait until we start to see that shift in the market before they start making some big decisions.
And this was a big, as soon as I saw the shift with the VA, which I think most of us anticipated it coming, and I think we're expecting to see even more shifts as we go through the process in August. But, you know, there were so many agents that when this settlement came out, their messaging on social media was just all focused on, well, what about VA buyers, and what about this and that and the other? And it really was, in my opinion, just really missing the mark on you know, what the discussion should have been. The discussion should have been on what we're sitting here chatting about today, right? How do we make our businesses stronger in the face of a change? And so when the VA adjustment came out, it was my soapbox moment to say, you know, agents wasted so much hot air talking about the poor VA buyers. We've got to give time for the market to normalize, but you as an agent cannot wait for that to come about to get your scripts right, to get your messaging correct to the consumer, because you're going to be behind those of us that are on this call today, really figuring out what's changing in our language.
Guys, my director of operations, Kristen, just dropped this and said, hey, drop it in the chat. It's the NAR's 179 ways agents who are realtors are worth every penny of their compensation. So I did add that.
That's the document. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
Perfect. So I put that into the chat box for anybody that wants to reference that. You can pull off of it, put it in Canva, make it pretty, whatever you want. So hopefully that's helpful to anybody.
So I think the main theme is just disclosure. I don't know about y'all, but I've been at the closing table just once where the buyer didn't know how much I was getting paid until they saw that statement, and they weren't happy. And it was a terrible feeling. So now that it's disclosed up front, I just feel that's the right thing that should have been happening all along.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. I think people avoid hard conversations, and money is a weird conversation, but like, guys, we're professionals, right? This is what we do as a living. We're holding people's most, you know, precious and expensive investment for the most part. So I think it's just one of those things that, again, the more you talk about it, the easier it becomes.
I wanted to touch on this because I really would be interested in hearing opinions. This was a headline, right? The settlement will serve to meaningfully lower prices and make homeownership affordable again. I'd be curious to know who on this call believes that this is a potential outcome from where we're headed.
Sorry to be so chirpy, but I feel the opposite. I feel like the most vulnerable population are the first-time home buyers that aren't familiar with buying and selling. If you've bought and sold 1 million houses, you probably know your way through that contract, and wealthier people will be competent in how to do that, how to hire an inspector, getting in touch with the attorneys. But first time home buyers know none of that. And now they're being told that they have to pay a buyer agent if the seller's not going to pay, and we don't work for free as agents. And, that to me is the most vulnerable population, and they're the ones with the most to lose or be harmed by not having representation.
And I'll pipe in here too, just to go on top of what she's saying. I sat in an attorney's office the other day preparing for my own home to close, and a buyer was going over with the attorney who was choosing not to have a realtor what specific services that attorney is willing to provide. And the attorneys don't have recommendations for inspectors. The attorneys didn't have recommendations for this or that or the next thing. And then they were asking for advice, and they were like, the attorney said, so I charge to close your home, not to give you and give you legal advice. What you're asking for is home purchase advice. So if you would like, we can start charging you by the hour to provide these services. But this is our baseline service sheet right here. And I was floored because they had a list of services they provide to close a home for you and provide that kind of service. And then they had a secondary thing where if you would like anything outside of these services, we will charge you hourly as attorneys. And I was floored hearing that, because we have this moment in time where it's like, well, I just won't use a realtor. I'll just go to an attorney. And I heard it straight from the attorney's mouth the other day.
Well, Erica, that's a great script for like the feel, felt, found. Like, hey, I don't want to use a buyer's agent. I understand how you feel. We've had clients that have felt the same way, and what we found is, right? And maybe find out what that hourly rate that they're charging is, because when you start breaking down a value sheet of what we do as agents and how much time that is, if they're being billed $250 an hour, and yeah, I mean, maybe everything's perfect and the transaction's easy and it's only a few hours here and there, but we all know that that's not how it's going to work. And I do believe that they're going to evolve. We're an attorney state in South Carolina. So I do believe that attorneys are going to probably have a list of services that say, look, you're not hiring a buyer's agent. This is our flat fee on top of X, right? Because they know they're going to end up getting the brunt of it. But the whole point of this, the settlement will serve to meaningfully lower prices and make homeownership affordable again. What they're doing is it's 6%, right? That's what they're saying. They're saying that we're just going to take that 6% compensation out. And now all of a sudden the homes are more affordable. And the problem is that what I believe is sellers are going to actually leave a lot of money on the table, because as soon as the buyer's agent commission starts to wean, right? Or people are saying we're not paying the buyer's agent commission, you're going to have a smaller buyer pool, like you said, Megan, of people that are unable to represent themselves. They don't know how to go from agent to agent to agent, listing agent to listing agent, or sellers to seller to schedule their own appointments. And you're going to see houses sitting on the market. Days on market are going to get higher, right? You're going to see price reductions. The trends will eventually go to the seller needs representation. We need marketing. We need to hire a listing agent, and buyer's agents need to be compensated for their job. So will this be something that I think is going to take over? No. Do I think it's going to be a trend like we see discount brokerages or sell your house for $500? Yeah, I think there's going to be a small percentage of the market that tries it and doesn't succeed at a high level. And I think there's going to be a lot of really smart attorneys that are going to come out with a fee sheet to say, look, we are not doing this is not a free service. Realtors have historically been paid on average about 2.75% to represent buyers in most markets across the nation. And our fee is going to be similar to that. Somebody is getting paid, right? And so if the fact of it is that the prices are going to come down because there's no commission, I also think that the listing prices are going to come down significantly, and then the trend will come back where realtors get back involved.
Can I also just kind of interject one thing, kind of going along with something that Anna said earlier and something that Megan said earlier? I do think that first time homebuyers, or, just maybe not first time, but even second time, I mean, you don't memorize the process in one transaction. They are the ones that need to be handheld the most. And I'll tell you, I talked to a potential buyer yesterday who was pre-approved with a big bank, and they were pre-approved. This guy is like 23 years old, barely out of boot camp, pre-approved for $400,000. And somehow in his mind, he thought that that equated to a $2,000 payment. And that lender had never broken anything down with him. And his realtor that he went and saw a $400,000 house with was able to be like, listen, you really need to talk to somebody who has a whole entire toolbox to be able to help you. And after I talked to him, he felt a lot better. So I think one of the value adds that you guys can add to first-time home buyers is that you have these connections of people who can explain things that you cannot, because you're not going to be masters of every single thing. That's why you've got the right home inspectors and lenders and attorneys who can help your clients too. And like you just said, Erica, attorneys don't have all those contacts.
Yeah, and I
that's-
personally find that money is a huge motivator for a seller or a buyer. So as a seller's agent, we're teaching our seller what the market can withstand with their home pricing. So there could be money left on the table if they choose not to work with us. There's a lot of finessing that goes on once we're under contract to keep the deal together. And then on the buying side, our job is to make sure that they don't overpay for a home. So most buyers aren't that savvy with the market where we can say like, look, this is what low, median, and high sale price numbers are. Let's get into this house and see where it falls in line with. My experience has been most buyers and sellers aren't that savvy to what our market is doing on a monthly basis. If you're a seller, you want to probably make as much money as possible. And if you're a buyer, you want to save as much money as possible. So whatever corner you're in as the agent, that's your job. And is it worth paying for? That's what your customer, your client has to decide. So we have to be able to very clearly articulate what services we're providing so that they can make that informed decision. And from my experience, since this has all gone down, most people are really, really happy to move forward with that clarity, and they're happy to pay for it, and they're thankful to have you in their corner.
One thing
think
I can say to you is oh, sorry, who was that?
That was me,
Oh, come on.
Ashley. I was just going to say something that I know we've talked about, but I've used on listing presentations and for buyers recently is really talking about the power of Zenlist and the office exclusives, whether it's, whether you have them in your area or you can, say that you have them across the country. I basically, let people know that we have an off-market Zillow that's searchable just like Zillow would be. And those properties aren't even going to hit the market. And so like I've had clients recently where I've met with them and there was a property that was in office exclusive. I'm like, I knew about this property a month ago. So if you know about those properties that are off market and you're networking with agents in your area that are with our company, you have an advantage because you have less competition, you bring more value to them. And same thing on the seller side. If you have someone that you're selling $1 million home or a $2 million home, well, you can show them the app, you can show them the map and say, look, we have agents in California that we partner with that we can show your property ahead of time. It's just another value add to go, this is why you're paying us, because we have products like this where we can place your home in different areas, not just throw it in MLS like everyone else. And the value proposition for a buyer is huge because they might have less competition and might be able to get the house for much cheaper.
One other thing I was going to jump in and add is really understanding how real estate trades in your state, like really being able to communicate that. So in North Carolina, we're a caveat emptor state, buyer beware. We don't have we have no contingency addendum in North Carolina. There, unless you have an attorney draft something separately, you have zero protection, zero outs on your contract if you have a contingent home to sell. Most people have no clue of that, right? Because they grew up with, it's contingent on selling my home, or it's contingent on it appraising. I don't know why I always use that accent when I talk about those people. That's just, I think I hear my dad saying it. But I mean, there is a very, very, very little buyer protection in North Carolina. And so go look at and a very litigious state at that when it comes to real estate transaction. And one of the best things I heard, I think it was Sharon Evans that talked about, the job of the buyer's agent is to remove the friction from the transaction. And if you're looking at, hey, we'll lower prices and make homeownership affordable again, that might be true. But when people are suing the pants off of each other because the buyer doesn't have any expectation of what they were due by the seller, and the seller has no expectation of what the buyer was supposed to do, and they feel like they've got to fold to some condition issue because they don't really know what the law states and they don't understand that the contract trades real property as is, yes, maybe we make it more affordable, but at what cost, right? At what true cost? And so really understanding how real estate trades in your state and being able to highlight the challenges within your state for both buyers and sellers. And then really taking that position of the job of the agents here is to reduce friction. It's to set expectations properly. And that is one of those intangibles that sometimes it's really hard for us to get to paper. So you've got to get really good at communicating that verbally at the table with those buyers and sellers. Let's just talk about this really quick. This is another big headline, that there was going to be significant restitution for consumers who were harmed over the years by using sellers agents. That you can go pull articles. It'll tell you the breakdown. Like there's potentially up to like $800 per seller that participates in the class action lawsuit. So just to give you some context as to what kind of restitution is coming back for these folks. The only people that really made money on this thing are those attorneys that put the suit together. So just that idea of the homeowner that was so wronged being compensated by the $418 million settlement when you break it down was a pretty insignificant amount. So that was just a headline that was bad. We put all of these headlines together in a pamphlet, and I'm going to see if Allison will chat in a second. I'm going to try to go into Canva and get that flyer for you guys. We printed like 1,000 and some copies from Canva, it's a couple $100. And we've just been slipping them into every single one of our buyer packets, seller packets. We've been having them at open houses. And really it just kind of goes through a couple of the big headlines. It identifies them as more mythical statements and then gives a real good explanation as to what was really behind that headline. What was the nugget of truth that caused the headline to appear? I think we wanted to touch on quickly too, a couple of things that we're expecting to be in our world, some new tools in the toolbox that we have not really had to use up until this point or have not had a need for. And that one of those things is that one-day buyer broker agreement. I'm a proud, EXP agent, and I think Leo and team had ours out within 7 or 14 days. Our approved one-day buyer broker agreements. Allison, I know you guys are a Zillow team, and I'm sure there's some people with Zillow connections on the call as well. And I thought it might be a good opportunity to kind of reach out, not just Zillow connections, but anyone that's getting that one-off sign call. There's no relationship formed, but the motivation for the person to reach out to you is to go and tour a property. So whether that's coming from a third-party connection, whether it's coming from a sign call, what can apply to all agents on this call likely. So I'm just curious what people are feeling about what this process looks like and how they plan to introduce this document, because I know we're smart and no one on this call is thinking, no worries, I'm just going to get to the house, I'm not going to mention anything about it, and I'm just going to assume that they'll sign before I open the door. I know there's no one on this call that thinks that that's the play that we're going to take. So Allison, what's y'all's team thinking about doing?
I mean, what we've talked about and what Zillow Flex has advised us on as well, and Zillow is actually working on the back end to create a system where if you are connected and you set an appointment, that this might actually be done for you. But again, clarity is power, right? I think that if I get the call at 2 o'clock asking to show a house at 4 o'clock, I'm not jumping in my car. I am not scheduling that appointment and jumping in my car and showing up at 4 o'clock and say, hey, Anna, before I turn this key and open this door, sign here, press hard. No, that's not my plan, right? My plan is to say, hey, Anna, thanks so much. And I appreciate that you are in the market to purchase. Has anybody explained and discussed agency with you yet? Well, no, they haven't. Or yeah, they had. And this other lady wanted me to sign something and I ain't signing anything. Well, Anna, I appreciate how you feel. And we've actually had a lot of other clients that have felt the same way. And what we found is that the buyers just need to be educated on the new process. So a lot of changes have taken place. And since August 17th, the NAR has changed the way that we do business as buyers agents and how we disclose and represent agency. So what this means is that I will be showing you this house and representing you as a buyer and negotiating my commission on my behalf. And so basically going through and helping them understand what it is and getting very clear on how to open up that conversation. I like to fall back on feel, felt, founds. That's my script opener for things that I feel uncomfortable with. So if nobody knows what that is, you just feel, felt, found. I understand how you feel. I've had clients that have felt the same way. And what we found is, and it's a really nice way to segue into a conversation to say, hey, you're not alone. And what it looks like is we just need to have a conversation about this. So for me, we'll have it in our Sky Slope where we can just click, send. It's just a one-time showing agreement. And my plan would be, once I meet you in person, I show you my value and I explain to you what I do as an agent. My plan is that we can have a driveway conversation or a buyer consultation at a higher level to then say, what does blanket agency look like? Are you willing to hire me as your agent because you want representation? So for me, no, my plan is not to get in the car and hope and pray that they're going to sign the document before we open the door. Because at the end of the day, if they do not sign that document, you cannot open the door. That's the answer, right, guys? Like we cannot show property with unrepresented buyers. And if everybody in our industry is doing it the right way and the legal way, then the buyer will not see the property if they don't sign the agency, even if they don't do it with the listing agent, creating dual agency. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that?
You know, we're on this call today talking about it because we know the rules and that we're here. I do wonder how long will it take for this to become more industry standard as far as, I mean, think about the agents that you see in your CE classes and you wonder, how are you an agent, right? How long is it going to take for them to figure it out? So I do think we're going to play on probably an uneven field for a little while. But I think eventually with disciplinary action and things like that, it'll start to normalize. So I think you can't, I wouldn't be relying on no one's going to open the door unless they sign the document, because I've been in CE in the last couple of weeks and I know there's some agents that probably don't have a clue that there was even a settlement. So with that in mind, I would just be really reliant on that value add proposition, and being able to really explain the one day document, and what that means for us. Ashley, what is y'all's teams talking about on this?
Sorry, I got something in my, you know, to be honest with you, I mean, when everything came out, we were talking about it and we haven't done much with it since then, because we already were doing buyer consultations. A lot of our agents on our team were doing 3%, you know, that was their fee, and they were having buyers, you know, come up with the difference at closing and explain, this is our value and this is why we charge this. So I don't know that anything's really changed for us. We're still all trying to do buyer consultations, whether it's Zoom or in the office. And I'm sure, you know, I'm not on Zillow right now, so I don't know what they've been working on the back end, but I'm sure because the date got moved a little bit, we're going to come back to that very shortly here. But I think we've always disclosed it and said, this is what our fee is. We're going to go, you know, try to seek that compensation from the seller. And if not, you may have to make up the difference here. So I think that because we've always done it, it's not something that's really going to change for us. It's just having the harder conversation up front, and giving them the options. So,
yeah. I mean,
hey guys, can I
sorry.
throw something out to get some clarification?
Yeah, Tom.
Yeah, hey guys. So, you know, I kind of took a wait and, you know, just kind of wait it out and see how it shakes out approach. And then this call has got me thinking of a couple things, and I was hoping you guys could clarify. So if the seller isn't covering the fee for the buyer's agent, you know, they assume the price will come down, right? Because that'll have to come off the asking price of the home or the sale price of the home. So then the buyer, if they work with an agent, is expected to come up with closing costs and the fee to cover us,
Mm-hmm.
which is going to drop them way lower in house values
Mm-hmm.
than they could afford in the first place. Am I reading that correct?
I think that's going to knock a lot of buyers out. As a lender, I work with a lot of buyers who rely on seller paid closing costs to be able to close in the first place. So without seller paid closing costs and without, you know, seller paid commission, they're not going to be able to buy a house at all.
I know, because they amalgamate those into the mortgage. So if you've got a $10,000 buyer agency fee, you amortize that over 30 years of a loan, and they're paying like $5 a month towards it or whatever the number is. But I mean, it's really gonna kill the entry level home buyer. Like it's
I don't know that the thing is, but I don't know if we're the ones educating the sellers and we're giving them the option and we're, figuring out how we're going to present that, they're still able to provide closing costs or whatever it is. You know, I think if we're doing the same presentation and we talk about the value of an agent on the other side and we talk about the value of getting all the buyers in the market to your home, not just some that will do it for 0.5% or nothing or hope that their agent pays. I think if we have those conversations and we are holding ourselves to that higher standard, I don't know that we're going to see these big changes. I mean, I think we will have some people, and we've seen it even on our team. A few people have said, oh yeah, the seller I went out to said, I'm not going to offer a commission or I want to offer a lower one. Well, that's fine. And that was always available to you, but you may, just bring the buyer pool down a little bit. Are you okay with that? And I think, to me, I don't think we're going to see much change in that part of it, because I think all of us in the area are going to say, look, this is what we're still doing. And it's up to the seller to decide if they want to offer something.
Well,
But
here's
if they don't,
my
then we have to
point
be
to that.
creative.
So here's my point to that. It's like when you go on a listing call and you've got a buyer who wants 650 for a property that's worth 575, you have that issue. The same thing we're going to see now is a seller, even though you have that conversation with them, it's dollars and they're tight with their money and they're going to say, well, I want to try it, or I'll try it for 1% or 2%. And it's just going to freeze the market. And there are going to be agents that will take it and say, okay, here, I will try it, just like a discount broker. They're going to be agents that say, okay, I'll try to sell it with no commission. Okay, let's bump it to 1, let's bump it to 2. It's going to take a long time to shake out.
For sure. And that's, I think that's the hard part, is we have this hard deadline where all of a sudden we have to pivot on the procedure side, right? But the reality is it's going to take months, probably years, for the market to adjust to this singular date. And I think that's one of the challenges is just making sure that if nothing changes, then great. But if we do start to see massive shifts, that like we're ready for the verbiage and the conversations and even the infrastructure. Because here's something I think about as a team lead with 20 some agents on our team. How on earth are we going to manage all of these one-day buyer broker agreements? I've been asking this question since we heard about the settlement. I literally I'm like, oh, do we create? I mean, like literally just the logistics of maintaining that many documents. And then really understanding, what does that look like as far as procurement goes? Here's another thing I have a question about. And it kind of goes into open houses. We're going to talk about that. Like our agents are, I think, very well scripted. I'm really good at helping them really mine down the conversation to figure out, is there an agent involved? Because what happens when you host an open house, which I believe will be a huge opportunity come August 17th, because those people that don't want to sign something with a Zillow connection or with a sign call are going to likely just wait until the weekend shows up and they know the house is open for tours anyways from 2 to 4 on Saturday. And there's really been no clarity on what would have to be signed in order for someone to attend an open house, right? So I think there's still some clarity that needs to happen on that front. But from an open house perspective, I walk in, Ashley, you can be the client. Ashley walks into my open house and says hello, and I say, Ashley, are you working with an agent? And what does Ashley say? They always say no, they say yes. They say yes, because from their experience, they've learned that as soon as they say yes, the salesmanship of that open house attendee typically just falls off, because it's like going into a shopping center and say, or a store. Sorry, I sound like a boomer. Go into a store and say, hey, do you need help with that? And we almost always, just like human nature, we're like, no, just browsing, right? Because we don't want to make that commitment to have someone sit there and impact our experience. So I feel like good about making sure our agents go a little bit further and say, oh, that's so great. We're part of, the top 5% of our market. Typically the top 5% of our market is doing about 95% of the business actually. So good chances are I might know who you're working with. Do you mind sharing with me your agent name? And when they sit there and flounder over it, or they're like, oh, well, it's like my wife's like friend from college, like then we know that, that's different, right? There's an opportunity there. And then we'll qualify with, well, have you signed an exclusive buyer agency agreement? Not a disclosure explaining agency, but are you under an exclusive buyer agency agreement that spans maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 months? And when you get them to that point, most of the time they're saying no. But here's my question in this new world come August 17th, where everybody and their brother, if they're going in and looking at properties, has signed a one-day agreement. How are we really going to qualify if someone's under buyer agency or not? And that's one of my—
I feel like there's going to be a database somewhere, and you guys are going to have to put a name into a database with an expiration date. That's the only way to manage it.
I don't know how. I honestly, I think that the confusion of what the consumer has signed, and you got to think maybe a spouse goes out one day looking at houses and signs something, and the other spouse isn't there because it's just a home tour. I do think there's a lot of logistics behind this that we still have got to figure out. And that's what we're really, firstly trying to figure out how is the back end of this going to be. But I think, I think that's the angst of August 17th is suddenly it's not just the scripts. It's not just the conversations. There's also a component of how am I going to manage the documentation and the things that I need for my business to be in compliance. And those are the things that we don't have any case study. We don't have any examples of where this has been done in the past. So I think that's something as an agent community that we can do is really continue to collaborate and figure out how do we do some of these processes that we don't even know what the process looks like. But we're trying to be so in anticipation of this date, like you said, Tom, because it's gonna take months and months and months for it to become something normal. But we got to be in compliance on August 17th, right? I got to have the answers on August 17th in a lot of ways. So anyways, it's just some of my thoughts. And I know Ashley's not surprised because I keep asking people, I'm like, what are you going to do with all those buyer broker commission or agreements? Like, where are you putting them all? How are you going to manage them? How are you going to qualify buyers if they're under agency or not? All right. Any other thoughts? I think we've hit a lot of things. There's a lot to unpack here. There's a lot to continue working towards. And I think we obviously had to pivot today. Karen Mall was supposed to be with us and she had a medical thing come up. But anytime that we have white space in our schedule, this is where our heads can tend to keep going to. Just because I do think there's a lot to unpack and there's a lot to evolve here. So I'll just leave it. Ashley, any thoughts from you? Any thoughts from anyone? Any questions that we can answer? Anything that you guys want to schedule out in the future on this topic? That would be a more deep dive into something specific we've chatted about today.
I want to talk about something real quick. I am not an agent yet. I am working on my license, but currently I'm in property management work. And I know that you guys were talking about, the hard conversation with talking over your pay. And that's definitely a hard conversation that I have in my job is, I have a competitive rate, our company does, but obviously every other company in the area does as well. So having that hard conversation with, this is why our number is this way, and this is the quality of service that you're going to receive. So if you're offering a great quality of service, your client should be happy to pay that. And as well, the more you have that conversation, as Allison mentioned, you're probably going to get more confident with it. And you just need to be open to having that conversation and being confident within that conversation. I think it's definitely, and I went to a Hilton Head Realtor Association meeting yesterday and they were talking about the settlement. You can just tell everybody's distaste. And I think, it's going to be a tough year with this transition, but I think you guys just need to be confident in what you do. And I think it's going to be awesome for everybody. It's going to be tough though at first. So thank you. Sorry for my little snippet there.
Awesome. Thanks, Mallory. All right. Well, I would say go out into the world, do great things on this wonderful Wednesday. And we will be back next week. I have no idea with what, because I can't look at the Trello board, but I'm sure it'll be something great. Thanks always for being on, guys. I hope this was helpful and useful of your time. And we're just here to build collaboration and community. And hopefully every week there's someone's leaving with that's gonna, cause a change in their business. Because again, the second you stop changing, the second you stop moving forward, you're dying. And Allison and Ashley and I all believe in that. So our job here is just to keep all the forward momentum and all the change and all the questions. So we'll see you guys next Wednesday. Thanks again for being here. It was great.